Hello, and welcome to the Mr. 50mm YouTube channel. I'm feeling a bit warm in here. Do you guys hear that noise? It's my Geiger counter. Apparently, it's a bit spicy today. We're reading about 31 CPM. Oh, might have changed by the time I got up there, but you can have a look at that. About 28. And that's because right now my Geiger counter is about 1 foot away from my Pentax 50mm F1.4 Super Takumar. So, what does that mean? That means we're having a look at the 7-element thoriated variant of this M42 lens with a bit of a twist. Not only are we going to examine this on a regular full-frame camera, my 1DX, but we'll also see how does it perform on my medium format GFX 50S as well. So let's get into it. So what is the Super Takumar 50mm f1.4? Well, this particular variant, it's produced by, Asahi Optical Co., now known as Pentax, and this version of the lens was introduced in 1965. This one replaced the other 51.4 initially released the year earlier, which had 8 elements. This one, as well as the other one, was an M42 screw mount, has 7 elements in 6 groups. I'll insert the drawing over top of the video now. So this particular lens has 6 non-rounded aperture blades. It can focus down to 45 centimeters, and despite having the all-metal build, it comes in at a pretty light 230 grams. Lastly, the thing that makes this lens a little spicy is the thorium-based coating used for flare reduction on the lens. Operation and feel. First off, since this lens is manual focus, it does have a build that you might expect from an old manual focus lens. Very nicely done, all metal construction. Seeing as you're going to have to manually focus it, the lens feel is actually pretty important. The lens aperture and the lens barrel have a machined groove set on the lens that you can see here, and it provides some pretty good grippage for your hands. Now, I don't have any feel or any issue with the feel of the lens in this regard. Actually, kind of prefer it since it doesn't have any rubberized coatings that could disintegrate in the future. Now, with this lens, the focus throw is about 190 degrees or so. I couldn't find the exact number, but this is based on my scientific observation of my fingers. So that's about it. Now, moving through the focus on my copy is fairly smooth and pretty well dampened. The aperture ring is done in half-click or half-stop clicks, which is pretty great. Although on mine, there's a bit of stickage going through the range. There's also an auto manual switch, and if you're not using it on like a film Spotmatic or whatever, you probably just want to keep it on the manual mode so that you can use stop-down metering when you're adapting it to whatever, digital body or other camera body you might be shooting it on. Auto keeps the aperture open until the camera mechanically triggers the stop-down during a shutter firing. Image quality on full frame. So I get that this is not the swanky 8-element version, but, the spicy 7-element one. Now, that's not something that, you should just ignore. The 7-element one is fairly interesting. Wide open, I actually personally think that the lens in center is pretty solid. It's got reasonably good sharpness. Contrast is alright, and there's a bit of glow. Not from the radiation though. That being said, if you remember my video on the Nikon 51.2, I would say that it performed a little better at 1.4 than the Nikon did, stop down to about that f-stop. That being said, if you stop down to like f2.8, everything across the frame is mostly sharp, and you know, f4 and smaller is sharp across the entire frame on full frame. Not so much on medium format, but we'll get to that a little later. Now, let's have a look at how the lens progresses as you stop down from 1 to 2.8 to 4, and you know, who knows, maybe I'll shoot a couple more pictures and we'll have more examples. The lens has a reputation for a bit of swirly bokeh. Now, I don't find it super pronounced on full frame, although there is a bit of that. Now, on, again, the medium format, this gets a little more pronounced, but on full frame, I find that at around 1 to 1.5 meters of focusing distance is about the sweet spot to kind of get the background blur to do some swirly. And, you know, so if you're looking to shoot the swirly bokeh, keep that in mind if you get this lens. I find that if you go a little, you know, too far, either too close or out of the 1.5 meters, the pronouncedness of it is not as good on full frame. Bokeh itself, I do find that it is a bit jittery, kind of like older 50mm fast 50s as you would expect. Especially if there's a lot of bright light sources, the bokeh balls can get pretty prominent haloing. And, you know, given the swirlable characteristics, you can also expect cat's eyes on the outside of the frame, or towards the edge of the frame. That said, in the right light, the lens can deliver a pretty smooth bokeh. Now, when you stop down, since the aperture blades are not rounded, you will get the hexagons. Now, lastly, this lens is not a wonderkin modern 50mm, so there is going to be Loca. And I'll put a visual of that over top this face. That being said, this lens is thoriated, and in theory, it has some flare suppression, although it will still flare if you point it at bright light sources, and again, not as good as modern 50s in that regard either. Image quality on medium format, GFX. So this is where things get kind of interesting. The 50mm lens does cover the full size of the GFX sensor, although depending on a couple things, you can get some fairly severe vignetting. Again, if you're focusing on things less than 2 meters away and you're stopped down, it's actually not too bad. You can kind of either accept the vignetting that you get or try to digitally correct it. That being said, if you are trying to do a landscape at infinity, and even if you stop down to f8, you can still see some vignetting, although it is manageable if you do stop it down to that level. If you shoot the landscape wide open or not stop down very much, the vignetting is very, very noticeable. While the corners don't get pitch black, they get pretty dark. That being said, if you do a 3:2 crop to make it more like a full frame aspect ratio, the vignetting is less of an issue. But if you're doing the native GFX sensor size, you will see it. And again, we'll show that over top of my face. So to emphasize, the sweet spot for this lens is basically at 1.5 meters or less and at f2.8 or smaller if you want to kind of mitigate for the vignetting. That being said, the results wide open when you focus 1.5 or closer aren't bad. You will again just have to take into account that severe vignette. Again, this kind of might work out if you use some artistic ingenuity and or smart framing to take advantage of the severe vignette. Additionally, you will also notice that the left and right sides of the images will have a lot of detail smearing. And again, that makes sense given that the lens was not designed initially to cover this large image sensor size. And I'll put a photo up again to demonstrate what that smearing might look like. Now, this isn't a terribly bad thing, as if you are trying to emphasize things like the swirly bokeh-ness, and you frame it up in that 1 meter to 1.5 meter zone, you can get a fairly pronounced swirly bokeh on this camera system. And the smearing on the edges, as well as the vignetting, kind of focuses the eyeballs in your frame to the center of the frame, kind of bringing out, or at least helping, the swirliness pop a bit. So again, you can take advantage of the flaws in using the 50mm on the bigger sensor to, bring emphasis to your subject and work around that. Either way, I find this lens fairly fun to shoot on GFX. Tips and recommendations. As I mentioned earlier, this lens does have radioactive coatings. Now, the coatings aren't that spicy, but it is something to consider if you are worried about the radiation. That being said, keep in mind that if you have something like older radium painted watches in your possession, those are way spicier, and people still wear those all the time, generally to no ill effect. Don't lick the dials. But let's have a quick demonstration. I have a vintage Invicta here from the 40s. I'm going to hold it about the same distance the way that I was holding the 1DX there. And, you can already hear that the Geiger has kind of picked up a couple extra stray, radioactive elements there, decaying into the tube. We're already past 30 counts per minute, and it is just ticking up higher. It's hard to see, guys. It's hard to see that display. It is apparently not very good for recording, but we're at 45, and it is still going up. All right, enough of that. I'm going to turn that off. It's quite annoying. Now, one thing to consider that might affect the images, though, no, that will, is that the thorium coatings may cause yellowing of the lens. This might apparently has to do with the adhesives or maybe the coatings themselves kind of decaying. But it can be addressed by putting the lens in direct sunlight, apparently. Now, I did this a really, really long time ago when I first got the lens, like a decade ago, and I do believe it did help. It was out in like strong sunlight, I think for like multiple days. But, since then, I haven't really bothered, and it has yellowed a little bit, but doesn't really bother me. Now, here's the thing. If you're randomly walking around and you happen to stumble across a Pentax 50mm 1.4, how do you know which one you're looking at? Well, easy peasy. Pick up your Geiger counter and see if you get a higher rating. And if you do, that's the 7-element one. And if you don't, congratulations, you found the rare 8-element version. That being said, if you don't have a Geiger counter always ready, there's another slightly easier way to figure it out. Well, all you gotta do is take a look at the lens and look at the distance scale there. See if I can get it up in focus. Here we go. Now, it might be hard. You might need to, blow up this video full screen. But if you have a look at the distance scale at the number 4, on the left of that is a little red hash mark. That is to indicate the IR focusing marker. On the 7-element version, it is on the left. On the 8-element version, it is on the right of the 4. So if you're looking at 50mm 1.4 Takumar lens, screw mount, if it's on the right, you have the fancy 8-element one, and if it's on the left, you have the less fancy but more spicy 7-element version. Or, like I said, just carry a Geiger counter wherever you go. Now, for a vintage 50mm 1.4, it's still kind of collectible, and thus these lenses might be a little more than other fast 50s of the era, but they're still pretty cheap. You can generally find them for about 50 to 115 USD on the Ease of Bays, which is still actually way, way cheaper than the 8-element version. And its performance is pretty good, and the build is awesome. So either way, it's still fairly cheap, and it's actually a pretty cheap way to get some swirly bokeh. Now, again, it isn't the most prominent swirlage as other lenses, but then again, it's not as expensive as some of them have gotten nowadays. So in short, I think that the 50mm 7-element Super Tac is a pretty worthwhile buy for a vintage lens. So there we have it, my second 50mm lens review. You know what that means? Expect another poll to go up very shortly for what brand 50 should I review next. But here's the question. What do you think of this 50mm 1.4? Do you have any of the variants or this 50 1.4 as well? And as always, let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Till next time, bye.